Hello and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa special broadcast. I'm Gugule Tucele. Today we come to you from the Durban ICC, where international and local delegates have gathered for the Essence Festival Durban Business Conference, the inaugural conference of this nature, which sees exchanges and conversations taking place with regard to unleashing economic opportunities, not only in the city of Durban, but for the continent and the globe overall. While today, under the topic regarding accelerating Africa's economic transformation through industrialization, I have esteemed panelists who are joining me today to unpack their thoughts, their themes, as well as innovative ways and solutions that we can implement to ensure that inequality is addressed, as well as economic emancipation for all. We also have a wonderful audience who will be interacting with us today and sharing their insight, so let's prepare for this phenomenal conversation. Introducing my panelists, though, first to my left is Dumileqele, who's the Chief Executive of the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chamu Chiwanza, who's the President of the Affirmative Action Group in Zimbabwe, and last but not least, Susie Wakabi, who's the founder of Susie Beauty Cosmetics in Kenya. Well, let's commence with the conversation, and again painting a picture of the reason why we're all here, gathered in the city of Durban in eThekwini, which again, I understand the economic potential of the city of Durban should not be underestimated. Following Gauteng, this is one of the most important economic hubs, given the fact that it does contribute 11% to national employment, 14% to household income, and 16% to national output. So quite significant, and also has an extensive history in both the agricultural as well as the manufacturing space. Sister Mila, I'd like to commence with you by painting a picture of these sectors and industries which, again, are part of the industrialization of the economic performance of the city of Durban. But how have we translated the policies that are in place by best positioning ourselves competitively in the manufacturing and agro-processing space for the city of eThekwini and greater the province of KZN?
Thank you very much, Gugu, for having us today. And to the watchers of CNBC Africa, I think you say that Durban is one of the most important economies after Gauteng in South Africa. I think it is. Very often I find that people don't realize that the economy of KZN is the second largest economy in South Africa after Gauteng, both in terms of contribution to our GDP, but also in terms of the manufacturing sector, which is really key to the industrialization that we're looking for. So I think in terms of where we find ourselves as Durban, we sit in a very strategic position. Not only do we have the two most significant ports, and I think as Durban, we are really proud to be the port city that we are. We've got the busiest container terminal on the continent of Africa. We've got the deepest port in terms of our Richards Bay port to handle our bulk commodities. So I think in terms of positioning, world over, it is coastal cities that lead. And I know that in South Africa, it has been Gauteng, given our historical development, economic development around the mines. But I think Durban, KZN, is really the next best economic leader that South Africa will see. But not only South Africa, we believe that we are positioned to be gateway to Africa. So we really are very much cognizant of our strategic position in South Africa, but also in Africa. And we are really trying to catalyze that and make it real and make it meaningful to our people. So for us, what's important for us as a Chamber of Commerce is to contribute to ensuring that one of the fundamental things that we are working on is making sure that big business meets small business. We are trying to ensure that we open up supply chains of big business for small businesses, because it is agreed world over that our jobs will come from the SMME sector, but oftentimes our SMME sector struggles in terms of access to markets. So as a Chamber of Commerce, having all the businesses that are our members, we are already creating a platform where businesses meet each other to access the business-to-business market, but also the international market. So today, in terms of the partnership that the municipality of Durban has with Essence, with our sister city in the US, we are really hoping that we're beginning to make even further inroads and strides in terms of linking our businesses with international markets.
I'm glad that you bring that up because naturally Essence does provide that opportunity for further interactions, not only between local entrepreneurs, whether you're from Guamashu or Umlazi, with other entrepreneurs who might be in Los Angeles or Sacramento or even Inglewood in California. But I want to tap into the engagements and exchanges that you're also hoping to have with representatives of the US Black Chamber of Commerce and the California Black Chamber of Commerce that might benefit some of the individuals in the room.
You know, Gugu, I think our history has excluded us from the world in terms of our entrepreneurs understanding the fact that it is not just domestic markets that they need to look into. It's not just government markets. I think our government has done an excellent job in making sure that our entrepreneurs are able to access government spend. But as a Chamber of Commerce, we are hoping that our entrepreneurs will begin to graduate and move into forming formidable businesses that can grow from small to medium size. Some will remain small, but they need to be sustainable. So our aim during this conference is to make meaningful linkages with our US-based businesses, chamber to chamber, which then creates a opportunity for our businesses, our respective businesses within those chambers to meet, forge partnerships, and look at ways that we can begin to really capture world markets from that kind of platform and to assure our businesses, our entrepreneurs, that it is doable. You can venture beyond South African borders and not only into the US or the Far East, but into Africa. You know, the whole world is descending into Africa as the next frontier and the next market that's emerging. But oftentimes you find ourselves within the region are not taking full advantage of that. And it is understandable because of the exclusion that we come from in terms of our history. But we as chambers, working together with various government entities in terms of foreign economic representatives in various countries, we are able to hold the hands of our entrepreneurs into those environments which sometimes are daunting, but really present an opportunity that we can't miss.
Chamo, I'd like to come to you here, and Susie, I'd also like you to provide your insights, given your experience as an entrepreneur, in particular in the Kenyan space. But Chamo, with regard to your perspective and the view that you can provide us with, naturally we always tend to think that it starts off with policy. And at times that is the key enabler that is essential to unlocking the economic potential of various industries as well as growth there. From your perspective, how imperative is the implementation of policy? And I'm not too sure if you can provide us with observations as to the level of success, if any has been attained, especially given your background in Zimbabwe.
Well, policy is very critical. I must also harness to say that the implementation of the policy is what is much more critical than putting the policy in place in the first instance. I always coin a statement to say it's not what you know, it's what you do with what you know. So policy, particularly in African states, there seems to be a confusion. We want politicians to stay in politics, business people to do business for proper implementation of any particular policy. For as long as you've got politicians meddling in business, we will have no proper implementation of policy.
On that note, do you also think that there's a lack of interaction with business individuals and entrepreneurs to actually say, guide us on what kind of policy is actually best suited to your needs?
Sorry, come again with that?
Do you think that there's a lack of interaction between business individuals and the policymakers themselves to provide guidance on the rules and regulations which would enable them?
The interaction is there, definitely, but the tragedy with Africa is obviously corruption. So business people are not being left to do their own business independently. You will not get a big tender if you don't sign up with these big so-called chefs. And that is a big problem with policy implementation. So we might have the flourishing policies on paper, but implementation will always be a challenge.
Implementation, though, is what entrepreneurs do best because they see the gap in the market. And Susie, that's exactly what you did, leaving the US, seeking an opportunity, coming back at home, and starting and establishing this cosmetics firm, also boosting and enabling the manufacturing sector within Kenya. From your perspective, was the policy enabling? Was it easy to run and start your business before you actually found a solid partner to help you provide scale?
Definitely very difficult. whereby until today we have not been able to create our local manufacturing. It's really, really difficult, even in terms of, especially in terms of cost, electricity, setting up shop, so expensive. And finding the funding for that is even worse. Banks are not helpful. The public sector, the government does not really provide money for startups. Looking for that funding is close to impossible. And so you have to, go to private, maybe individuals. In Kenya, we call them chamas. They're like, groups of people that come together and, I don't know what you guys, you probably have names for them. And that's actually where I ended up getting my initial startup money from. And so, yeah, I think if the government could step in better, especially in that area, it would make startups be a lot easier too. I mean, so many would come up much easier and survive. A lot of them just shut down before they even start, right?
Sure.
90%, is it 95% of startups?
Exactly. And that's not even within the 5 years which it takes an SMME to survive.
Exactly, that's within the first year.
Goodness. On that note, perhaps there may be an invite that we can extend to go to Kenya to perhaps assist with the chamber development there.
That, I was listening to her and I'm like, oh, I wish we had that. Everything she said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I want us to unpack the elements of creating this in theme of industrialization and working with the blessings that we have of natural resources, as well as 60% of the world's most arable land. But what else is needed to ensure that we can actually establish a firm foundation of industrialization on the African continent, which is true to the foundation of our economic performance, given these resources that we have, but at the same time diversifying the revenue streams that the government as well as the economies are often so reliant on? Is it additional infrastructure? Is it additional skills? Where do we need to tap into in order to close up these gaps? An open question.
I don't know if you guys realize that, of course, South Africa is way more advanced than where I come from, East Africa, but now it's getting there. We have railway lines being built. I don't know if you know about like the Ethiopian one. That's been phenomenal for the region. In Kenya, there's a railway line that's going to be open next year. And that's going to just make goods and people be able to move so much easier. Of course, expanding business so much faster. So yeah, I think infrastructure, internet access, so you can reach the world so much easier and faster.
Yeah, I also think, Gugu, Africa must be able to harness its own capital. That's a tragedy with Africa. We're always trying to develop our countries using borrowed capital. And the resources, the natural resources, yes, belong to us, but we mortgage them for a song all the time. Pin and Cobra point happened in Zambia, where they sold their copper to some investors who paid a paltry, maybe $200 or so million US dollars. Copper worth $10 billion, mortgage for 200 million. So Africa needs to harness its own capital, and we need to start using our capital to our own advantage.
I want us to delve into that capital story even more because, again, that's where development finance institutions can play a role. Maybe private equity can also get into that space. And even angel investors. I think there are a few of us maybe in the room. I know there aren't any billionaires, but maybe some people who might have some spare change and set up an informal savings investment to aid and assist the guidance of SMMEs here too.
So, Gugu, my belief is that there is enough capital in Africa. There is enough money. There really is enough money to finance the business initiatives that we need to do. And of course, there is the, the foreign direct investment, etc. But I believe within Africa, there is enough capital. What I believe becomes critical as almost the horse that needs to go before the cart are two fundamental things. A previous speaker in this conference spoke about education. I think skills development is just critical in terms of the quantum leap that we need, moving from a historical background of a lack of education to a place where, and when I say education, it's not just, of course, primary education is important, tertiary education is important, but it's also being able to delve into research and development and begin to have education and innovative, going into the innovation that we need in terms of being able to move meaningfully into the industrialization age, well, the second industrialization age, which I hope won't look like the first one, because we live in a digital age as well. So for me, when I speak skills, for example, at the Chamber, we have a program where we're linking research and development in our institutions of higher learning with business, with commerce and industry, and beginning to look at ways of taking that research to market. Because oftentimes the academia have good research sitting in libraries, but it's not finding its way to academia and to market. And also, it begs the question of its relevance for our economy now. And also, commerce and industry have a need for innovation, but they don't have the research capability that those institutions have. So that becomes important. So education. But the second one you mentioned, infrastructure. Infrastructure becomes an enabler. And I think to catalyze industrialization in Africa, we're going to have to be very serious about ensuring that we bridge our infrastructure deficit in terms of energy. Energy is critical. A previous speaker spoke about that. You cannot, and in fact Susie spoke about that, you cannot begin to attract investment, set up shop if you don't have energy supply. And the second thing is transportation. Africa is known for not being properly and adequately linked within itself. I come from an age when, back in 2000s, flying to North Africa, you had to first fly into Europe and then fly back because you couldn't connect directly. So transportation from a people connectivity, but also from a goods connectivity in terms of our port systems and our rail, our roads, our air connectivity. So I think to really catapult ourselves into the industrialization that we're looking to go into, those two things are critical for me, infrastructure and education. And the education aspect, we have an abundance of youth, of young people, whom I believe is one of our biggest assets first, before our mineral resources, is the fact that we've got a young population as opposed to the rest of the world with an aging population. Now that is an asset that we can develop and export. I'm looking forward and we've already started, but we need it to be radical. We can begin to export our skills to the rest of the world.
Exactly.
For the benefit of our continent, of South Africa, of Africa.
I just need to get on Dumi what she just said. Dumi said Africa has got a lot of capital, and I don't think that is true. And she withdrew that statement technically when she said, I remember there's a time that when we want to come to a part of Africa, we have to fly through Europe or something. It goes to show that the capital that is perceived to be African is actually not African capital. You need to check the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, for example, and check who's controlling the majority of the stake on that. Is it South Africans?
Oh boy, you're getting into a whole transformation conversation, which perhaps we should delve into because the numbers were divulged this morning and again in a presentation by Mr. Mangi just yesterday at this conference. But with regard to that, when it comes to capital, and many of the entrepreneurs in the room might be able to agree, perhaps it's the risk associated with the investment that needs to be made. And I know several comparisons have often been made with capital flows in developed markets like the US, where risk and failure is actually worn as a badge of honor for a lot of the entrepreneurs, whereas in South Africa and many other emerging markets, it's still a safety element that you need to succeed in order to increase your access to capital. I'm not too sure, perhaps if you can see by indication of hands from the audience as to whether my statement is correct. Is it easy to find financing in Africa? And perhaps we can challenge this with the panel. Anyone having challenges getting access to panel in order to increase and perform effectively with regard to their entrepreneurial initiatives? By show of hands. I see one, I see two. So everybody has a spare, amount of capital in their bank account.
Wow.
So maybe it agrees with what you're saying, Sister Mile.
Can I maybe qualify what I said?
Go ahead.
There's, I think, the misperception. We talk about the JSE when we talk about African ownership, and I fully agree, and it was divulged earlier. But within when I say South African, I'm talking black, white, pink, yellow. And it is a known fact that because of low business confidence, JSE listed companies, South African for that matter, are sitting on loads of cash reserves that they are actually not investing. So maybe access is a problem, but it being there, I don't think we have a lack of it. So it's accessing it, having sometimes the ability to get your hands on it and the right people. Somebody once said, I won't say who it was because I might be wrong, but they said it's easier in South Africa to get hold of 30 million rand than to get hold of 30,000 rand for the SMME. So I don't know about saying that capital is not available. At least maybe I'm speaking for South Africa. There is plenty capital, but sometimes we don't have the confidence to invest it in South Africa, invest it in our entrepreneurs, make it easier for our entrepreneurs to access it. And that's both commercial as well as developmental capital.
Susie, you were nodding your head in agreement before we come to you.
I don't think it's a South African issue. Definitely very much the same in Kenya. From a personal perspective, I did 3 rounds of financing to get to where I am. All local investors. There's a few global ones that come into the country, but there's a lot of local ones now. But when we go to like private equity funds and like pitching to them, we need $200,000. They're like, no, figure out what you can do with $1 million or $2 million. And we're like, we don't know. I don't need it right now. But it's much harder to get the lower amounts, and I just could not understand that.
Chamo?
Yeah, I mean, facts must be said if we're going to talk about real acceleration of Africa's economic transformation. Gugu, I must say this. I agree with what Dumi's just said, but for starters, a lot of capital that she's talking about is not South African capital per se, because if you're talking of FDIs, that's borrowed money. You're borrowing money from outside to come and utilize it in this country. That's one way of looking at it. Secondly, a lot of our natural resources, I'll give you a simple example. There's a company called Zimplats in Zimbabwe, which is owned partly by implants in South Africa.
49%.
49%. And what they simply do on a daily basis is they mine out chrome and platinum from Zimplats, platinum rather, and then they ship it to South Africa for processing.
Let's touch on that, because that takes us to another element of industrialization, which is the beneficiation of our natural resources. And I know it's a topic that's almost being talked about all the time, but the implementation, again, there is a challenge. I hear you on the capital element, but perhaps the direction that we need to view it on is with regard to SMMEs as well as larger capital firms. But I'm glad you bring up the issue of Zimplats, because I know beneficiation is also a huge theme
it's a big
with
challenge.
regard to industrialization, and it appeals as well to agro-processing and the likes. From a chamber perspective, are there insights that you have there, Dumile? And maybe you can also share your experience. Julie?
You know, I come from a maritime background before joining the chamber, and my observation and experiences that I gained was just heartbreaking levels of beneficiation. And my absolute bugbear is how is the policy framework ensuring that we reverse the existing world order, economic world order, because we know that, Africa and other places, but we were colonized, and our commodities were extracted and shipped out as they were in their raw state for the benefit of other countries. Now, for me, in fact, I saw it yesterday. I drove up from Ladysmith to Durban yesterday, and I saw this huge truck with 2 boulders on its back, huge pieces of granite on its back, transported from inland down to our port to be hurled onto a vessel and shipped somewhere. Now, what can you do with a piece of granite, a big piece of granite like the size of this platform? It's being shipped somewhere to be cut up, polished, and sent back to us as Italian tiles. I'm not digging on our Italian counterparts, but that for me is evidence of the lack of beneficiation. Now, I'm looking for radical policy that says to our miners, 10% each year you will retain, and we will not export it raw. So you begin to create policy that forces our mining companies to begin to look into where those commodities are going, what is being done with it, and begin to pull that particular value chain back onto our shores. So really, that is what we as a chamber, in terms of our advocacy role and our lobbying of government, goes in terms of saying, let us begin to draft new policies that are going to change the world order, where perhaps world over, economies have been set up on this kind of balance of powers, and we begin to change that. And slowly, Africa needs to have an absolute determined program to reverse that.
Very briefly, before we do go to an ad break, I want to get your perspective, Susie, because your cosmetics line uses mineral resources as well for some of the products. Are those sourced locally? Is that a form of the downstream chain of beneficiating of these assets?
Yeah. So initially, my number one goal was to manufacture locally. During my research, I actually went with a list of ingredients that I wanted to use to a chemist, the professor of chemistry at the university. And he went through my list, canceling every raw material that I'd written down. He's like, these are not available in this country.
Sure.
I would have to import all the raw materials. I'm like, but we have, aloe and avocado and like all these. And yeah, he's like, you can export it to the manufacturers that you find to put into your products, but you'd have to import the raw materials also. So, that just makes it that much harder. That was going to be a completely different project from me just developing a great makeup line for the African woman, which was my goal. So, that turned everything around. So while I sit at home and mix the products and sit with a chemist and come up with the formulas, somebody out there has to mass manufacture for me. So it's really sad. And the same when you're talking about, exporting the minerals, and our biggest exports in Kenya, coffee, tea. But, the coffee bean is sent and then it comes back a finished product.
Exactly. Chamu, you wanted to add something very briefly?
Yeah, I think as Africans, and particularly as the corporate world of Africa, we must do away with what is so-called corporate social responsibility. Because that's a way of apologizing for, they apologize for their profits. We must embrace what is called share profit value. Now, that encourages corporates to work with communities so that there is mutual beneficiation. So before they export their products, we would have also benefited. Not corporate social responsibility, where they go and build a school, put some few chairs and a billboard and say, here's what we've done for a community.
Real transformation.
Yes.
Tangible, sustainable.
Yes.
That's exactly what we're going to get into.
You should use the word radical a few times.
Very good. Well, the audience agrees, and radical transformation is what the agenda is still about. When we do come back from the ad break, though, we'll continue this conversation, also focusing on the role that women and youth play with regard to being a part of the economy that seeks to industrialize quite competitively across the African landscape. We're taking a quick ad break. We'll be back right after this. Hello and a warm welcome back to the CNBC Africa special broadcast in partnership with the eThekwini Municipality and Durban Tourism, where we live streaming to you from the Essence Festival Business Conference taking place at the Durban International Convention Center. Now, the conversation underway is certainly radical economic transformation, but also empowering Africa's economies by using industrialization as a key enabler and tool. Now, just before the ad break, with my panelists as well as some of the audience members with their participation, we discussed very briefly infrastructure, skills, education, as well as access to finance that needs to be enhanced in order to unlock this potential. But we all know that today we also witnessed the results of the US presidential elections. I must say I'm a bit disappointed that a woman is not at the helm of the country, but nonetheless, history is being made as a self-made billionaire is actually now the 45th president of the United States of America. A twofold question here. We talk about women. She might not be the president of the US, but a representative and a substantial figure herself, this being Hillary Clinton. And also, the panelists that we have out here, Chamu, you've been outnumbered, so be careful what you say. But we see in the audience as well the role of women and their participation in the sectors which are varying. I recall seeing a hand from one of the other corners of the room that a woman was involved in the motoring industry. How critical is the empowerment of women and the youth, which Dumile highlighted are a key enabler to unleashing economic potential and workforce on the African continent? Let's start with you,
I think being the only man on the panel, it's only right that I respond first. But let me say, not just women, also a very important facet of our society are the youths. So it's not just women. Women and youth, they don't need to be politically expedient, exercised in sloganeering and rhetorical flourishing. In other words, what I'm saying is we are sick and tired of our women, particularly in politics, to be used to gather around and say, Amadla, where to? And then we don't see them taking front rows in the powers, on the corridors of power in politics. Same applies in business. Women are majority. I have coined what is called womenomics. Womenomics is the study of economics better understood by women. Now, let's break it down. Womenomics means if you go to statistics, they're 52%. The 52% of the world's population are women. So naturally, we are outnumbered. So if it was going to be a vote to vote for a president of the world, and women would vote for a woman president, you would have a woman president of the world. But so if we have that dynametrics where women are outnumbering us as men, and I've said to a person, there are tendencies of women that are not like we are different from men. Between 2014 and 2015, women's gross expenditure across the world was around about $2.6 trillion US. That's a gross expenditure bigger than of India and China, So in other words, women are money spending machines.
How do we include them so that they're not just consumers, but are the producers? Because you see, Susie has a problem with that.
I'm driving my point home. So if women are money spending machines, it's a challenge to us, the men, and it's a challenge to the women as well. Let me break this down so that you can understand in a layman's language. If you walk into a shop today, CNBC has got a shop that sells clothes. A woman will walk in there, a man will walk in there, buy whatever he wants. If I know I want a pair of trousers, I'll go in there, look for a pair of trousers, and pick it up and go. But if Dumi or Susie walk into that particular shop, they are laughing. They know what's going to happen there. Even when she wanted to spend $500, she'll end up going into an overdraft.
But that's the point. We want to change that, so that's not the perception. The reality
it's a good thing,
should
though.
be very different.
It's a good thing, though. It means the policies of Africa, the policies of the administrators, the politicians, and the business people must now pay special attention to the women. Mark Zuckerberg was clever. He realized that there are more users of Facebook who are female than that who are male. He made his sister the marketing director. So all the executives that are in this house today, they must know that if your business, you don't have a critical role which a woman is playing in your business, you're bound to fall very soon. You must pay critical attention to the needs of the women. They are the future of the world business. They are the future of Silicon Valley. They are the future of JSE. Naturally, because they're numbers.
Let's get your view, Susie, because you're a female entrepreneur. You've had to run through the loops and, of course, engage with other females, I take it, on evaluating the success of your product.
Yes. Maybe 99% of my users are female. There's a 1%. But there's a reason why my industry is recession-proof, because the women are the ones who buy the beauty products, and they will make sure that they have their beauty product. They run the households, pretty much, right? They run the finances of the household. They do the shopping. If I need my lipstick, you won't have your steak tonight. Women are more frugal spenders.
Absolutely.
You'll go and buy a car, and she'll go and buy 2 dresses.
Absolutely. Thinking for the long term. Sister Mila, I know from a Durban Chamber perspective as well, there is an initiative that you run which enables the empowerment of women internally.
Absolutely. And I probably agree with both my panelists here. So at the Durban Chamber, we've got something we call the Women in Business Forum. However, whilst these are called priority sectors, women in business, youth in business, the truth of the matter is that it becomes an economic imperative of the country. It's like transformation. Oftentimes, the whole agenda of transformation seems to be driven by, in our country, black people, because black people need to be included. But it shouldn't be, because I think we all, black, yellow, red, and white, need to understand that it is an imperative for the country. If we do not transform and have inclusive economic growth and include the whole population, it's going to all collapse on all of us. So the same applies for women empowerment and youth empowerment. It is an imperative of the country to do. So recently I read a World Economic Forum report on the gender gap. And what that does, it looks at the gender gap across 145 countries. And oftentimes I've asked audiences where do they think South Africa came out. And it's 145 countries across the world, from the first world to the third world, everybody, the US, the UK, everybody included South Africa in there and a few other African countries. And oftentimes it's very interesting. When you talk to the more affluent audiences, they reckon South Africa comes out bottom. And when you talk to the perhaps less affluent or the smaller businesses, they actually are feeling the change that has taken place. And they will often say South Africa must be doing well, because now as a woman, I'm sitting here at the ICC, I'm a business owner, etc. The reality is that South Africa has moved, and this report has been going on, this study has been going on for 10 years. Last year we were 18th, this year we are 17th, as Africa in terms of closing the gender gap. What is interesting is that they measure 4 aspects. They measure, the first aspect is around politics, how South Africa has closed the gender gap in terms of between men and women in politics, and we come out number 1 in terms of politics. I often say, I attribute that to the gains that have been made in terms of our political transformation post-94, the gains that were made by the women that marched in 1952.
So they did serve a purpose,
so they
more
served
than
a
saying
purpose,
Amangawethu.
and we've come a long way in terms of politics. The second part in which we've also done well in terms of closing the gender gap is in health. Women have access to primary health care. We no longer die as women during childbirth and this kind of thing. We have better access to medical care. The third aspect, which is very interesting, is education, where South Africa is not doing well against the other countries, because in terms of education, other countries have gone a long way in terms of embracing the digital age. Where South Africa is worried about textbooks delivered to Limpopo, other countries are hitting a button and it's on the kids' devices, because that's how the children are studying nowadays. So whilst South Africa has closed the education gap in that women are becoming as educated as men, I mean, you've seen in classes, it's really a 50-50% representation between men and females, even right up to tertiary. But in terms of the world standards, South Africa is not up to scratch. The least area where the gender gap has not been closed is economics, which is what we are talking about today. So the issue you speak about women needing to own means of production rather than being consumers is fundamental. And it is all about and if we don't do that, we are not ensuring the future of our country, our continent, into the future economically. So it becomes very important that women become owners of means of production, own their own businesses, have an access to finance, have an access to markets, and that is what we are doing in terms of ensuring that women are brought into the mainstream of our economy.
I just want to put a point out. I think women, the United States election would have, I was having a pre-briefing before this with my fellow panelists, and you're laughing, you know what then happened. The United States election has given us an introspect into, because a lot of us were thinking that America was going to play the women card, like women this and women this. And I was saying to my fellow panelists, and I want to say this to all the women in the house and the CNBC African women viewers who are watching. Women do not need the support of the men to be successful. Women need to support themselves.
And the audience is agreeing with that.
Women, Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from this mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. None but themselves, the women, can free their minds. We will not give them financial liberty on a silver platter. That's not going to happen.
But
they have to take
we cannot do it alone either. Women do support a lot of female businesses. Otherwise, cosmetics firms like Susie Beauty would not exist today. Otherwise, some of the women who are in the room today venturing into various sectors of business would not exist today.
That I'm not talking about.
What about the role that men play?
I mean,
There are more women, let me make this point.
Yeah.
Within the women population, there are more women supporting other women, and within the male population, there are less men supporting women. So if we understand that supporting and ensuring that women become empowered is an overall imperative, why are there less men supporting women? I understand not all women support women, but in terms of the population of women, trust me, there is a higher percentage of women supporting women than within the population of men supporting women. So I think that's where it's at. So we cannot point fingers and say that women are not getting ahead because other women are not supporting them. I agree some are not, but it is our male counterparts that have failed us in terms of ensuring that they take us with them, especially the black men. It's very important that as we fought for black economic empowerment, we fight for women economic empowerment. In fact, as the Chamber, we are championing a new piece of legislation that's going to be women economic empowerment, because if we are able to have legislation around black economic empowerment, understanding the representation of black people within this country, we better have a piece of legislation not just as an add-on to the black economic empowerment piece of legislation. We must have it as a standalone if we are 55% as women of this country, and we must do it absolutely in a decisive manner in terms of empowering women.
I want to come to the audience very briefly just to check questions, but before I do that, I also want to link this theme of women empowerment and youth empowerment to the theme of overall black empowerment and transformation, because radical transformation is the ultimate theme here. Are we getting it right? Just yesterday on the stage, we sit in a panel discussion, again unpacking the fact that black businesses do perform. Support each other, use your networks, and that
That's
your
the point.
ICE is as cold as your white counterpart's ICE. Are we seeing that taking place efficiently within the role of industrialization on the continent?
yes, we're seeing that happening. But let me just take you back a bit on what Dumi said.
Shamu.
The focus of our modern women, umama walamhla, you know, in Shona we say muzimai wanas, must be moving with the times. She was talking about the chamber focusing on women education and so forth, and that books and so forth. But you see, that's a colonial way of looking at things, thinking that education is the only route to success. Majority of the billionaires right now on the Forbes list are college dropouts. What are women doing to empower themselves? Not just looking at education and the conventional way of doing things. Let's think outside the box.
So are we focusing on the right sectors as well? Because with the role of the fourth industrial revolution, perhaps agriculture might be different in the future, where 3D printers will produce avocados as well as the fruits that we look to export.
Yes.
Do we need to think more in a tech space, but also being relevant to our African audience and African needs? Because a driverless car might not make sense when you live in a village that doesn't have roads, infrastructure. So how do we get that right? Do we focus on the right sectors, but also base our foundation on industries that have proven to be fruitful?
Technology is super important. We have a youthful population. How many people don't have a phone or a smartphone? You know, so where is everything going to go? And that's the way that everyone needs to think in those terms.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And Gugu, what becomes important is to take our youth with us in terms of driving industrialization. We've identified that it is important for driving and accelerating economic growth in Africa. But our youth are key to that, because I think it's going to become important that our youth become relevant. Because now we live within a digital age. A previous speaker spoke of the fact that I call myself oftentimes a BBC, born before computers. So whilst we can drive these policies of industrialization, we need our youth to begin to make themselves relevant within the environment that they live in. How do we make the industrialization within a digital age?
Yes.
So in terms of the research and development and innovation and their ability to move with technology, how do they make that relevant to deliver the economic imperatives that our country needs? And that, for me, is where we really cannot do without our youth. So the industrialization that we speak about now is not going to look like the industrialization of the 1960s. It's going to have that digital element in it that's going to ensure that it is probably it will accelerate. You know, the whole notion of the digital age is that we work smarter, we get things done faster in a more smart way, and that is where our youth businesses need to come in. They need to come in and say, how do we contribute to the innovation that is needed within the sectors, within agriculture? How do we become innovative in that? And the older generation, I've got a child at university, so I consider myself the older generation, doesn't have necessarily those skills. The skills we need for the future, a previous speaker spoke about new industries that have come in. I mean, renewable energy and so on and so forth are new industries that weren't there 10 years ago, you know, for us at least, in terms of Africa. And it's the youth that are going to help us catapult ourselves into the future.
Fantastic. On that note, I think we're going to get a feel for comments that are coming through from the audience. Lots of commentary that you can provide your feedback on. So if you do have a question or feedback that you'd like to provide, I do see a hand at the back there, but I do also know that we have two representatives, Chris Peely, who is a local businessman in the tourism sector and a representative of the Tourism Board, Chairperson Claremont Tourism. He's the chairperson of that institution. Please make your way to a microphone and pose your question, ma'am, and we'll address it to our panelists. We'll take 3 questions from the floor, and Chris Peely as well as Avashentwa. My apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Avashentwa Archer Ngidi also has some feedback to provide for us. Ashantiwa, there we go. Thank you so much. We'll take your question, ma'am. I'm just waiting for 2 more people to make their ways to the mic so that we can take your 3 questions back to back and then get some feedback from the panelists. We'll start with you, ma'am, then the gentleman at the back. And the next question, the first person to make their way to a mic will address.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just have a question for the gentleman there. We're talking industrial revolution. And you said earlier that in order to empower women and children, we need to do away with the so-called social responsibility. By the way, I'm a social entrepreneur, and I find that disturbing. If we are to move to industrial revolution, we need that kind of empowerment. We need business need to come together and support the NGOs, support the social entrepreneurs, and support children through education. And through that, we will be able to move on to the next stage of industrialization. And also, I just want to find out from your perspective, if you are saying that we need to do away with the social responsibilities, I just want to know how then do you empower the youth, because those are the core existence of empowering the youth. So I just want you to clarify that with me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll respond to it briefly. We'll take the second question from the gentleman at the back.
Hello.
Go ahead so we can hear you.
I just want to know what can be done to big companies that operate in Africa to make them fair. For example, we pay more for petrol in Africa than any other place in the world. We pay more to phone than any other place in Africa. We pay more to eat than any other place in Africa. For example, if you go to McDonald's, with $1 or 10 rand or 13 rand, you can't eat, but in America you can eat. They pay less for petrol. If I want to phone to America with 10 rand, I can give in 5 minutes. But if I want to phone to Zimbabwe, they told me you don't have enough money to make those calls. So it's very, very expensive to do business in Africa. Who can make these companies, accountable so that they can also do what they do in other places? In America, you can travel from Los Angeles to New York with $100, but you can't fly to Zimbabwe with $100. I don't know how we can do to make these things a little bit fair so that we can also make money when we do business.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, sir. We'll take the last question from you, sir. Go ahead.
Councillor Wayne Thring from, eThekwini Municipality. The panelists indicated that some challenges with males, females, and I now understand why possibly marriage is called a workshop, where the man works and the woman shops. But on a more serious note, understanding that South Africa currently faces a double deficit, a deficit on our national account, national budget account, a deficit in terms of our current account, understanding the serious challenges that we have with regards to beneficiation, and that's where my question is going to be tagged on, and also understanding the challenges in education, where the last survey indicated that some 60% of our grade 4 learners, by the time they get to grade 4, are illiterate. And where we want to build a knowledge-based economy, it seems as if all of the areas in which we want to focus on, we are coming short in. How then do we radically transform our economy, where we have the challenges where for the past 22 years, we speak about beneficiation, and yet we don't do it? What pressure ought business to bring on government who makes the policies? What pressure ought business to bring on government to ensure that the policies that we have, which are good policies, are then implemented? Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, sir. What we will do is get very great questions coming from the floor. Our panelists to share their views and their insights on the questions that they prefer to respond to. So the pressure with regard to implementation of these policies, so that we not all talk but show action. Secondly, with regard to cost of doing business on the continent. And lastly, CSI. And that was also brought up by the Deputy Mayor with regard to social entrepreneurship. Panelists, go ahead and respond to the questions.
Okay. Thank you, Gugu. Let me respond to my sister, who is a social entrepreneur, who spoke about corporate social responsibility. And I think she didn't understand me when I was trying to point out a fact. I'll give an example of Marikana, where there is platinum mining there. Now, corporate social responsibility is majority of the multinationals in this Africa, in this continent, who realize that the Africans who live close to our communities where we are doing multi-million dollar mining are impoverished. And they noticed that. And they wanted to close your eyes so that you don't complain too much. They came up with what is called corporate social responsibility, sort of apologizing for their profits. They'll give you some bit of some money to go and build a clinic. They buy some few injections, and they say they put in that clinic. We are saying we want to do away with that. We want what is called profit shared value, where the communities themselves are owning equity in the mine.
So there is a role for social entrepreneurship, which is
there's a much bigger role and even a bigger value for the social entrepreneur, because now they've got a stake. I'll give an example. If you're in Marikana, a resident in Marikana, and the overalls are being worn by the workers, the miners in Marikana, imagine if social entrepreneurs are the ones who are helping to sew those overalls and implants, say, we'll buy from our locals. Or would say, please give us 3 or 4 people who come and cook papu at lunchtime for these workers. That's profit shared value. We don't want corporate social responsibility. It's nothing. They're apologizing for their profits. You're getting a tip of the iceberg. You can get much more value. It actually talks of beneficiation as well, because we just see those things being shipped out. We've got nothing to say, because tomorrow they'll come and say, here's some school uniforms for this particular school close to our mine. So keep quiet, you can't complain.
Chamu, very briefly, we are under pressure for time very slightly. I'd like to come to you, Susie, just to give us your perspective with regard to the other 2 questions. Cost of doing business. Are there ways and elements, given that you yourself are an entrepreneur and having dealt with some of these issues, are there initiatives, are there suggestions to drive down the cost of doing business?
You know, I think it just comes down to government. And maybe, I was just thinking, maybe like, you know, industry partners get together and put policies together. Tell the leaders what you require, what you need, and follow up. Don't just leave it alone. I think Africans are quite complacent. That's how it is. We just have to live with it. And that mentality is what needs to go. And get together and make the leaders do something about what you need.
True. Very briefly, Sister Mila.
So I think now more than ever before, the role of organized business is going to become critical, because a lot of these things are not going to be done by individual companies on their own. It is being able to organize yourselves as business to do some of the things that Susie speaks about. And I think what's key there, and I think South Africa has really seen the light in this regard, in terms of the partnership between business and government. You know, oftentimes government was seen as the policy makers and the policers. They police those policies, and business was seen as trying to survive in a very non-conducive environment. And I think what she's saying, where you do it together, so that we achieve optimum outputs is what's going to be necessary. So, for example, in terms of doing expense, the one gentleman spoke about it's expensive to do business in Africa, everything you do is more expensive. It speaks to the tax regimes. It speaks to all the input costs that are involved. And it speaks to government and business getting together to understand what that landscape looks like and being able to then set policies in place that are conducive, that are to the benefit of the people in general that do business in the country, that live in the country. So where it's done separately, I think it is bound to be contradictory and therefore not assist the country in achieving its objective in terms of economic growth. The whole notion around the knowledge-based economy that we're looking to achieve, the beneficiation, again, I think there's a place where government and business need to come together in order to make that a reality, because you can set all the policies you want. If they're not implemented, they mean nothing. They're as good as the paper they're written on. So I think what becomes important is that business, and I think from an organized business perspective, being part of a chamber, I am advocating that business becomes responsible corporate citizens in this country, that we identify what's important for the country, not necessarily for the individual in the short term. So whilst we have to make the profits, whilst we have to grow as businesses, but we need to grow within a context, and we need to concern ourselves with the overall growth of the country, and we need to do that in collaboration with government.
Collaboration. I think that's the critical word that certainly comes out today, whether it's women supporting women or men supporting women, and again, the participation between both the private as well as the public sector. I wish we could continue with this, and maybe we will off air very briefly, but unfortunately we have to wrap our conversation here for today. That does bring the special CNBC Africa broadcast to an end as we come to you live streaming from the Durban International Convention Center, where the inaugural Essence Festival Business Conference has kicked off. A big thank you once more to my panelists for joining us and sharing their insights. Dumile Cele, the Chief Executive of the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chamu Chiwanza, who's the President of the Affirmative Action Group Zimbabwe, and Susie Wakabi, who's the founder of Susie Beauty based in Kenya. That's where we leave it for today. Do join us again next time as we bring you more specials from CNBC Africa.